Welcome to IELTS Easy. Speaking 2. Getting off to a good start. The first part of the speaking test sets the tone for the whole interview. This lesson will outline the key things you must do to get your interview off to the best possible start.
Here are goals for this lesson. Take some time to carefully read them, and when you're ready, as I've mentioned in another lesson, speaking is the only module where you will be examined individually, one-on-one, with the examiner. Generally, most people find interviews of any sort a little intimidating. But for something as important as an IELTS test, it can even be more of a concern. A person who is nervous or unprepared, or both, can do poorly even if that person is normally a fluent English speaker. Because the speaking test is short, taking less than 15 minutes, you really need to get off to a good start in the interview. Now the good news is that part 1 of the test is relatively predictable. So you can prepare with some confidence. If you can make an initial positive impression on the examiner, and get your interview off to a good, confident start, you'll give yourself the best chance to do well in the remaining 2 test sections. In this lesson I'm going to give you 4 major points, which will help you to get off to the best possible start in your IELTS speaking exam. My first point in getting off to a positive start in your speaking exam is to make a good first impression. The initial impression that you make right at the start is very important in helping to maximize your band score. If you arrive late or appear overly nervous, it can give the examiner a negative impression. So for your own benefit, plan to be well groomed and wear appropriate clothing that will not detract from your interview. Of course, I realize it's hard not to be nervous in such a situation. But you can overcome quite a bit of nervousness by the way you initially communicate with the examiner. As you enter the room, smile and act confident. Look at the examiner in the eyes and confidently introduce yourself, clearly pronouncing your name. Being bright and cheerful can really help to hide your nervousness, and this will also relax the examiner. Remember, he or she may have already done several speaking tests and may be feeling a little tired. At the beginning of the test, the examiner will introduce him or herself, and you'll be required to officially confirm your identity. Use this time to build a relationship with the examiner. Smile. Show that you're relaxed and happy to be there. Clearly and slowly pronounce your name. If your name is different to what you like to be called, tell the examiner how you like to be addressed. It's a way to create a warm and friendly atmosphere. Be aware of any nervous gestures you may have, and eliminate them. Some people start tapping on the desk or play with their watch band or a piece of jewelry. Don't do this. It will distract the examiner. You only get one chance to make a first impression. So give it your best shot. My second point is, be prepared to talk about yourself. Part 1 of the speaking test is something you can thoroughly prepare for. Because the first questions are always about you. It's the introduction and interview section of your test. At the start of your speaking test, the examiner is wanting to start a dialogue with you. The way they will do that is to ask you personal questions. In fact, the first questions will relate to where you are from, or they'll be about your work or about your studies. You should note these 3 areas and be ready for the initial question. It will be something like this. Could you tell me a little about your hometown? Can you tell me what it's like where you live? Tell me a little about the work you do. Can you tell me about what you plan to study at university? These first questions are quite predictable, so you should be well prepared to get your interview off to a confident start. After the first couple of questions, the examiner will move on to other related subjects. Again, the topics will be about you. Think about what sorts of questions you would ask a new friend to get to know him or her better. This is exactly the type of question you will be asked in the next section. Topics such as family, friends, your hobbies, interests, and more on where you are from. The examiner wants to hear you speak about yourself. On the screen in front of you are the sorts of topics that you can expect the examiner will ask you to talk about in part 1 of your speaking test. Notice that they are general topics, the kind you'd ask someone that you're trying to get to know in general conversation. Imagine you're in the interview with the examiner and he or she asks you to talk about your personal experience in any of these areas. What would you say for each of these subjects? You should have a personal opinion. And be ready to talk freely about what you're asked. Practice doing this. A note of caution, however. If you memorize your answers, the interviewer will immediately pick up on this. And you will lose points. Don't try and learn a script. Instead, practice talking about these topics with your friends. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with someone who's shy and won't communicate? It's very difficult to get to know them, isn't it? You don't want this to happen in your speaking test. You must be conversational. This is my third point, and it's very important. Being conversational means you make the effort to interact with the examiner, like you would with a friend. When the examiner asks you a question, don't answer it with a 1 or 2 word answer. Make conversation. As much as possible. Talk freely and openly about a subject. Let your positive personality and character shine through. When you reveal your personality, you are really communicating. If necessary, be creative and expand on a topic. The examiner will always interrupt you if he or she feels that you're going off on the wrong track. I also suggest that you don't just try and give the answer that you think the examiner wants to hear. Be honest and open in your conversation. It will flow more easily. One final point. The IELTS exam can be a little intimidating, but this should not stop you from taking the initiative. That means that it is okay to ask the examiner an occasional question. If you don't understand something, ask. If you think that something is funny, then say so. If you think something's interesting, then comment on that. All these points add up to being a good conversationalist. I'd now like to give you some examples of good and bad conversation. Listen to this first example.
Where do most people live in your country?
Manila.
Now, do you think that this was good conversation? No. A 1 or 2 word answer is not good conversation. Compare that answer with this one.
Where do most people live in your country?
Well, most people live in Manila, which is a very large city. In fact, I recently heard on the news that the wider population is now, I think, over 10 million. This makes it one of.
And what about this example?
In which country do you plan to study?
In England.
Again, compare that answer with this one.
In which country do you plan to study?
Well, I'm really hoping to study in England. Ever since I was a young girl, I've always wanted to go there. We actually have relatives in London, and my cousin is.
Notice how the answer was creative and expanded on the initial question. This is good conversation, and also showed the examiner some of the student's personality. Here is a common question we are all asked.
And how are you today?
Good.
Most people say, good. But why not say how you really feel and take the opportunity to add to the conversation? Like this next example.
And how are you today?
Oh, good. I've been studying hard all week. And I've been really looking forward to taking this test today.
Giving full and descriptive answers is important, and will show the examiner that you're a skilled and fluent speaker. Here are some more examples for you to consider. What if you don't know an answer? Don't be afraid to admit it. But don't just say, I don't know. Notice in this next example how the student doesn't know the answer, but still gives a quality response.
How big is your hometown?
I'm not sure, but I do know it's pretty big. It is certainly one of the bigger cities in my country.
As I said earlier, don't be afraid to extend the conversation by asking the examiner an occasional question. Listen to this next example where a student answers a question and also uses the opportunity to make conversation with the examiner.
And where are you from?
I'm from Paris, in France. Have you ever been to Paris or Europe?
You should also not be afraid to tell the examiner if you do not understand a question.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Or,
I'm not sure I understand. Are you asking me about whether or not?
And finally, don't be afraid to politely disagree on a point if you feel it's important. Like this next example.
I'm sure you must find air travel exciting.
Oh, not at all. In fact, I don't like traveling by plane at all. I'm scared of heights. I much prefer traveling by car.
These are just some examples of good, interactive conversation. Aim to make your introduction and interview a positive experience for the interviewer. And you'll do well. My fourth and final point. Don't forget the basics. It's so easy in exam conditions to forget the basics of good communication. Remember to speak clearly. It's far better to be slow and clear than fast and unintelligible. If being nervous makes you speak quickly or reduces the clarity of your speech, then force yourself to slow down. Practice talking slowing and clearly if this is a problem for you. In addition to being clear, aim to project your voice. You'll sound far more confident to the examiner if you talk with confidence and some volume rather than mumbling or speaking in low tones. Also try to avoid repeating similar phrases over and over. Sometimes as we learn a new language, it's easy to fall into bad habits and repeat similar phrases over and over. You know what I mean? Even standard phrases can become bad habits if you are not careful. I suggest getting your friends to listen to your conversation and ask them to pick you up on any bad habits you have. This'll help you become a better speaker. My final point is to simply think before you speak. Short moments of silence are far better than blurting out a poor answer. Force yourself to pause before speaking, just to get your thoughts together. If you're speaking clearly and confidently, any pauses won't be noticed. Apply these points in all your speaking, and you will do better. This lesson has been all about getting off to a good start. As I said earlier, if you get the Part 1 introduction and interview section of the exam off to a positive start, the rest of the exam will proceed more easily. In summary, aim to make a good first impression as you walk into the room and settle down. Secondly, do your homework and be well prepared to talk about yourself. Thirdly, be conversational and interesting to the examiner. Finally, don't forget the basics of good communication. Apply these points, and you will get your speaking exam off to a great start. Well done. You have now completed this lesson. Before move on to the next lesson, make sure you fully understand the lesson above. I recommend you to review from the beginning. See you in the next lesson.